Again, I'm going to record this one for the students at home. Um, and we've got a lot going on in the country right now. I don't want to worry about too much of it right now, but what we will do is just show you some of the headlines here um, from the poli sci class. We've got a really rocky transition. President Trump doesn't want to seem to acknowledge that he lost and try to help the new government get set up and established. This is a period called the transition period or a lame duck period. It's just a term we use for it. But he needs to kind of get out of the way and let the new government take charge. And instead, he's, um, you know, not acknowledging the win, and he's also blocking necessary things to happen to help us move forward with the coronavirus and so on. So it's a very tricky time politically. All right. Don't want to get into too much of that, but that's what's going on. Mr. Biden, though, hit an important plateau. He got 51%, just barely this last overnight. They're still counting votes all over the country. Um, the reason we can project a winner and reason we know Biden's won is because there's no mathematical way for President Trump to catch up in any of these states. But in many of these states, like California, they still maybe have 500,000 votes to count. It's obviously, I think Biden won this like 65% of the vote went to Biden here in California, some of these other big states. And so that's why the numbers keep growing. And now it looks like he's won by about 5.5 million votes. So he will be our next president for sure, no questions asked. And he needs to now get Mr. Trump to acknowledge that. And it triggers a law. And there's a law that allows them to meet with government officials and to plan a peaceful and smooth transition from one government to the next, which is like really important with things like coronavirus. Um, Now, one of the things I want to talk about is this virus work. The lines for testing are just insane right now, right? And our current president decided to pull us out of the World Health Organization in the middle of this thing last summer. The World Health Organization is the international body that coordinates the fight against these kinds of things around the world. They're really important. They're part of the United Nations. And I don't know why he would pull the funding, but here it is. And this is from a European publication. President Trump has formally moved to withdraw US from the World Health Organization. Why you would do that? It makes no sense at all. You have to defeat this virus on a worldwide level. Okay, you're listening carefully? You have to defeat it on a worldwide level. And I'm thinking about allowing you to maybe drop one of your study guides in the future and instead write the paper they're doing in political science on the science, the worldwide effort to come up with a vaccine, which I think is akin only to the great space race of the 1960s. I'll explain what I mean. The World Health Organization, everybody says, don't do it, don't do it, did it anyway. We need to be part of that, and we'll be part of it as soon as Mr. Biden takes over again. January 20th, it's already said we're going to go back into the World Health Organization like we've been part of it since 1949, since it first started. All right, well, the people we need to be listening to is like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the head of the National Institute of Health. And these are the people that are working on getting us vaccines and making sure we get the science and technology done right. Right now, that team is not being allowed to talk to the new Biden team coming in to plan strategy for January 20th and beyond. But this Fauci guy is truly a national hero. He's an older guy. I mean, he's 79 years old. He's out of Brooklyn. Oddly, ironically, the same city where Trump was born. So that's kind of ironic. But at any rate, the CDC is also the Center for Disease Control in the US, which is responsible for these. They're like the World Health Organization for the United States. And so they've also had their funding cut at a critical moment when we needed to have a lot of people in China to work with the Chinese to figure out what was going on with this virus so we could get that information back to scientists. The Trump administration basically cut that staff. Here it is. The initiative's 11 CDC, let's see, staffers have been cut to 3 people at a time we needed them there the most. 39 local workers classed as local employees were reduced to 11. This was not good. He slashed funding to the CDC and then took it out of the World Health Organization. Well, here's the deal. The virus began in China, right? These things happen. the great swine flu probably started in Kansas in the United States, right back 100 years ago. Now, China has a state of the art facility near Wuhan where they study all of these potential infectious diseases. So they really know what they're doing. China is an extremely educated place. They have a lot of money. They're very powerful. They're probably the world's largest economy right now, and they have the greatest capacity to produce vaccines of any country, no doubt. Look at what they did with their virus, controlling it. It hit them hard, but they shut down everything. It's a mask wearing culture. People wore masks. They're now just doing contact tracing because it's not widespread. It's below 3%. We're at 23 in Utah. But look what they did. It started out, oh my goodness, we got a problem. Shut it down. Let's get this under control. They did. And now look at it. It's literally flat. They're at 1.5 billion people, and they've only had 4,600 people die of this virus. The reason they're so good at it is because back in 2003, they were terrible at it. They had a virus hit them called SARS, and it did to them what COVID's doing to the United States right now. And they vowed never again. And that's when they developed all of these reaction programs and everything else in order to make sure it didn't happen again. So right now, as of today, there are less than 86,000 cases, something like that. Anyway, the point is the Chinese, though, were the first to see this. And way back in January, right? January, this is a long time before we knew it was a problem. They had already sequenced the genome. Now, listen carefully, because you might want to do this alternative to one of your study guides. Yale Medical School, back in January 23rd, wrote an article about this. Why is this so important? Listen to me very carefully, all of you. You're at a STEM school, science, technology, engineering, and math. This is the stuff you're here for, right? History, political science, they're important, but you're in a STEM school. And watching how this works has got to be a great education for you. If you're going into medicine or if you're just interested in science and genetics, genomes, this is such a critical thing. So when we're talking about world history, this is world history right now responding, the whole world responding to a virus. You can't just stop it in the United States and hope it goes away. If you stop it in the United States, if it's happening somewhere else, it's still going to come here. I don't know if you know this or not, but the United States has been banned from travel to Europe and to Canada because we're the super spreaders. They don't want us to come up there, right? Because they've got it under control or more so, and they don't want us there. It's a worldwide effort is all I'm saying. We need to join the world's effort and be a part of it because we are a small country. We don't think of ourselves as small, but we're 4.5 million, 4.5% of the world's population. Right now, we've had 20% of the people who have passed away from this virus. So we've done terribly with this virus. But the Chinese gave the world a gift in January. They sequenced the DNA. So let's go to this Yale article. And I think I'll post these online, this one particularly. But rapid data sharing and genomics vital to China virus response. Why is this so important? Because you can't have a test to see if you have the virus unless you know the genome. Unless you can look at the DNA and say, these are the markers. And if you have these markers, you have the virus. If you don't have these markers, you don't have the virus. And if you don't do this scientific research first, you can't get to tests and testing. How many of you have been tested? Raise your hand. Have you guys gone through the test? How many did the swab up the nose deep into your nose? Was that terrible or what? Oh, but you found out, right? Hopefully you tested negative, or if you did test positive, you took your quarantine time, right? Okay, I found it funny. It was, to me, it was like being in the swimming pool and get water up your nose, right? Raise your hand if that was the sensation you had. Yeah, to me, that's what it was like. Anyway, never mind. The point is that test can't happen unless a couple of things happen. One, you have to sequence it. Now you look down here, it says right here, how the virus genomics changed epidemiology. Here we go. Thanks today, thanks to China's quick public release of the nCoV 2019. The reason it's called COVID-19 is because it was discovered in 2019. It's not the 19th version of this same virus. This is a new virus. That's why they put an N there, novel. It's a brand new thing. And they've now 18 genomes connected to this that are being shared and studied by scientists around the world, which allows our testing programs to start and the study for a vaccine to start as well. So way to go, China. So China, of course, has always been a leader in technology and world history and all of that. But this is where it starts. Now, let's talk about the World Health Organization. And sadly, our current president doesn't want to be a part of this. Well, wait a minute. We need to be a part of it. And we will be a part of it again on January 20th when President Biden takes over. But here's the thing. There's 170 teams of researchers around the world racing to develop an effective vaccine. And to do that, you have to do their preclinical work. Then you do phase 1, 2, and 3 to prove whether it's going to work and whether it has side effects or not. Was it safe? And so this is how the world judges these things. And look at how much progress we've made. We already have 12 vaccines in large scale efficacy trials. In other words, you start out, you don't put it in humans yet. You're testing it, whatever, the best way you can, trying to make the right thing happen. 164 stuck still in that level, but 40 are doing small scale safety trials with small groups of people to see initially how it's going to work. Then you expand those trials to many, many, many more people, 1,000 or so. If that works, and this is kind of where most of them are, then you can go to large scale trials where you can give it to maybe 50,000 people and see what the response is. So far, none have passed phase 3 yet, but we're getting close. And when they do, they'll be approved by the World Health Organization and by the United States equivalent of that, the Food and Drug Administration, which will tell us, yeah, this is safe and effective. You can take this and that. Now, there's more to it than that. Not only do you have to get a vaccine, now these guys have one at Pfizer that says it's 90% effective, but it's got to be stored. And this is the other side. If you choose to do this paper, this is the other side of the story. The other side of the story is that it has to be super, super cold. And only hospitals have refrigeration that cold. So it can't go out to like nursing homes or just to clinics and whatever. It's just too cold. And it's a 2-shot vaccine. So it's really hard to make, hard to store, and hard to ship. Another group that worked with Anthony Fauci's group at the National Institute of Health, these guys, called Moderna, they got a big donation from Dolly Parton. You guys don't know who she is, but back in my day, she was one of the more famous country singers. And she put $1 million in there and says, let's figure this out. Now they're a research lab. They can't make it. They can just develop the research, but theirs was 95% effective. It can be stored in regular freezers. You don't need anything special. You don't need to be sub-zero, 30, 100 degrees below zero. You don't need to be that. So this one looks interesting, and it's a 2-shot vaccine. So yeah, however much you can make, divide it by half, because about every 3 weeks you need to get a booster. All right, now to make it, they've already looked at, okay, who can make it? And so if they get a vaccine, they have to be able to make it. And the company they're looking at right now is in Switzerland. So this is what I'm talking about, world history. This is a very much a world history problem. This company, Lonza in Switzerland, says if they get this vaccine from Moderna, they can make 40 million doses in a year. So that's their capacity. We need many more than that. And by the way, these are worldwide companies. So all this isn't going to come to the US. We're going to get a piece of that. And you need 2 doses. So only 200 million people. We got 8 billion people that need the vaccine. And it may be that we have to get the vaccine shot every year from here on in. So who's got the capacity? Well, it's not here, because obviously Moderna, if they have to go to Switzerland to get the capacity, it's not here. We don't have the labs to be able to do it right now, but who does? China. China aims to make 1 billion vaccine doses a year. Wow, okay, that's great. Only problem is their population is 1.5 billion. If it's a 2-shot vaccine, that means only half of their people can get it. And we got to get to the point where we have 65% of everybody in the world taking this vaccine in order to create what's called herd immunity. Okay, so this whole project is of worldwide importance. And thankfully, starting January 20th, we'll be back into this and on a world level and not trying to go it alone, because you can't go it alone. You have to work with the world community. The other thing you have to do is you have to get the vials. They got to make billions of vials. They have to get syringes, all the things that are associated with that. And right now they're in short supply. So when we look at the situation we're in right now, this vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel and it's really exciting. But until then, we've got some real problems. Our economy is really hurting. We have people in food lines, and this is just Dallas, Texas, just as an example. We haven't seen food lines like this since the Great Depression, 1929. These people are lined up. Of course, with COVID, you can't stand in a line, right? You're in your cars, and 26,000 families had to stand in food banks in order to get free food to get through the next few weeks. That was just yesterday. The other problem in Texas is that people are also trying to get tested, and these are the lines in Texas to get tested. And they're running out of syringes and the swabs that you guys remember. They're running out of those and all that, and they're just barely trying to keep up. And the labs that have to process it are running behind. So we're in a real mess. And this is the kind of what we call a keyword here, if you're going to do this paper, logistics that have to be solved. So let me go ahead and give you this alternative. To skip any one of the remaining, I'm just toying with this idea. Let's bounce this off y'all and see what you think. What if we did this instead of the next study guide? How many would want to do that? Raise your hand if you're interested in substituting a study guide on Rome and doing this instead and studying this. And the reason it's so important, I think, is that it's like the space race. It's that big of a deal. No one has developed vaccines this quickly. It's never happened before in world history. It's one of the turning points in science. So let me kind of assess the group, okay? So I would rather do this than the next study guide on Rome. Nobody? Just one? I got one. The rest
is it a paper or just research?
It's basically 2,000 words. So it's about the same as what you'd be doing for the study guide. Wow, look at this hesitancy. You're all thinking, how many thinks the Roman study guide would be easier? Raise your hand. That's why you're hesitating. If they were about the same, what would you say? Yeah? Now, see, that's the thing. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we, wow, this will be tough. I don't know. My poli-sci classes just jumped at the chance. And so I had about 60% say they wanted to do this as opposed to their research paper. But I understand your hesitancy because you're used to the study guides, right? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll put it out there as an option. And if you do it, then I'll let you guys skip a study guide. Otherwise, I'll just do the normal study guide, and most of you will just end up doing that. Or maybe you could look at both and decide which one you think would be best. I don't know. It's kind of, I just hate to see you miss this historic moment. This is like one of the biggest moments in scientific history on the planet Earth. Most vaccines take 4 to 6 to 10 years to develop the vaccine and then to distribute it so that they get enough shots so it works. And this is kind of one of those moments in history to kind of look back on and be proud of. So, okay, well, let's think about it. Let's not make that an option yet. Let's pull that off the table for now, and we'll talk about it next Monday when I have the next study guide ready. And I'll let you guys maybe choose between the two. So we'll see. All right, so, I just thought of how to do it. Okay, so on Monday, I'll have a solution on how to do it. I love this. I got the answer. I got the answer for y'all. Okay, so how about this? How about if I do a study guide on Rome, but also in that study guide, I have the essay that you can write on the race to the vaccine. And you can do, and if I see that race for the vaccine, I'll take that and I won't worry about the rest of the study guide. I'll just grade that. Raise your hand if you think that would be a good option. You guys follow that one? Okay, so we'll put it in the same study guide. So you can choose. So you open up the study guide and you go, I don't want to do that paper. That's too much. Okay, or that 2,000 words. I want to answer all these questions about Rome instead. So we'll leave it up to you to decide that. And so this will work. So those that want to take on this great moment in world history when it comes to science and technology, we'll leave that as an option. Okay. All right, cool. Well, world history gives us a lot of options, and now let's get back to Rome, okay, shall we? That was fun. Thank you for participating in that. But it was so fun to watch your hesitancy, right? Oh no, is it going to be more work, less work, right? Okay, we'll get this figured out in a way that you can decide what you'd rather do and try to keep it about the same. All right. Well, let's now get back to our regular Roman history. And where we last left off, we were talking about the rise of Christianity, of course, and how it's going to transform Rome from a pagan society to a Christian society. I would, I don't think this would be too much of an insult to the Romans to say that they left superstition for religion. Um, let's be honest, their gods were iffy at best. Um, Now they're looking at a different way of thinking about how they interact with people. Now, we do know that the fountain of this was Judaism. And we talked about the Jews wanting to rebel after Pompey the Great conquered them. They wanted a warrior king, an anointed one, a Messiah to rescue them from Roman bondage, right? Which um, would have thought God would have helped them with, and this kind of thing. So they had several unsuccessful rebellions that we talked about. We talked about the one of Judas of Galilee that was crushed. And then we talked about later ones, Josephus, the historian who wrote about it, where these zealots led a revolt against Rome that was disastrous and caused then this war in 66 AD, which ended in total failure for the Jewish people. And in 70 AD, Titus, the soon to be Roman emperor, destroyed them. Okay, so what we talked about then was the arch that was built to honor this. It still exists in Rome today. You can walk right underneath it and look at it, and depicting this victory. What this did, and here's the arch again, another picture of it, and here's that a better picture of that scroll on the back side of it. So I wanted you to see what's on the back side, and it's this: as they're taking away all of the sacred relics of a religion and destroying their temple stone by stone. This was 70 CE, and this was the beginning of the Jewish diaspora. Now, as I explained earlier, Abraham gave birth to two great peoples, actually more than that, but the Jews and the Arab race. They're both what we call Semitic. They're both speak Semitic languages. Arabic and Hebrew are very similar. They grew up together, but the Jews were destroyed and dispersed, and the Arabs remained there. And so we have this situation where we're almost 500 or so years in the future, the Arab population in Saudi Arabia, in Palestine, in this area, will convert to Islam. Islam will become, where Rome was this incubator for Christianity, but it was a slow growth incubator, right? It would take about 300 years. Islam didn't take that long. In 100 years, it expanded into the areas you see here. It was the fastest growing religion in world history in terms of speed. Also, by 2050, it will be the largest religion in the world, surpassing the Roman Catholic Church. Now, they're going to have their own problems, which we'll be talking about later, in terms of division and that kind of thing. But what we're saying is all this area then becomes Muslim in about 600. The Jews are spread out throughout Europe, the Middle East, but a lot of them in Europe, in Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and in Spain, where they're not treated well. In an event prior to the sailing of Columbus, or about the same time Columbus set sail, there was a thing called the Inquisition, where the Christians literally kicked out all the Jews out of Spain. That they had lived under Muslim control for 700 years peacefully, but suddenly now they had to flee for their lives. The Jews became persecuted in part because Christians were intolerant of a group that they blamed for the death of Jesus. And this persecution would continue. It's called anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish. And of course, what's going to happen next is there's going to be a lot of interesting events happen as a result of Titus's victory in 70, with the dispersion of the Jews all over the world, right? They had no center, right? So they had to worship now in their synagogues and study and read their scriptures again and again and again and interpret them, whatever. This means the Jewish people are going to be very literate. They're going to be very smart, and they're going to be denied certain occupations, particularly in agriculture, whatever. So they had to make their way in the world by their intelligence and their wit and their hard work. So they did jobs that other people didn't want to do. But these jobs in the end ended up producing more money. So Jewish people generally all over the world do really well. For example, there's a lot of Jewish folks that are really good at cutting diamonds. And that became a huge industry, like in the city of New York and whatever. It made them very, very wealthy. They got into banking and things because they were denied land. They couldn't own land, whatever. How do you make your money? They did it by trade. And they also did it through banking systems. So the Jewish people thrived regardless of all the oppression against them. And that was one of the problems. When they succeeded, other people were jealous of that and would persecute them even more. So it's really kind of a tough time. Let's go back to the beginning. Remember the foundation stone where Abraham was going to offer Isaac, right? And God stopped him and says, no, we don't do that anymore. Well, this place is called the Dome of the Rock. And today it's on top of the old temple. I think I've got a picture. Oh, I should put it in there. Darn it. My bad. I'll put in a picture later to show you, but it's on the top of the Temple Mount. This was where the temple once stood. Well, listen, here's what happens 600 years later. Muhammad now, beginning his religion, travels to this area where Abraham and the old Jewish temple was. And according to this religion, ascended to heaven, met with angel Gabriel, and prayed with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and received all those teachings. And so this becomes a sacred location in all of Islam. It's one of the three most sacred places of Islam. And I'll talk more about that in one of the last lectures of the year. So now what we have is a city, Jerusalem, right? That is the third holiest place in all of Islam, but also where Jesus was killed. It's where he was resurrected too. And it's where the Jewish temple is. Do you guys see potential for conflict here? Do you see that in our times today, that what happened in 70 is impacting our history today? It's impacting our history in an amazing way. It's called today the Arab-Israeli conflict. And what happens, and I'm jumping ahead in history here a little bit, but I want you to tie it to the present, right? I want you to tie it to what happened between 70. During that time period, there was another group that got converted to Islam called the Turks. And the Turks finally destroyed the last Christian Roman kingdom right here called Byzantium and took over Constantinople and established a huge empire around the year 1580. This empire was ruled by the Turks, Muslim in religion, and controlled all of the Holy Land in Egypt too. It was a massive empire. All right, well, fine, except that along comes World War I. And we've talked about World War I, right? The war to end all wars. That's why we brought it up when we did. Because in World War I, the Ottoman Empire joins Germany in that war. And as you guys know, the Germans won on the Eastern Front against Russia, but lost on the Western Front against the United States, France, and Britain. When they did, the British and the French chopped up, now listen carefully, after World War I, they chopped up the Ottoman Empire into little pieces. The Ottoman Empire had always been a thorn in their side. The British particularly had fought several wars against them. And, well, oops, they joined Germany. So when the loss came, now here's what it looked like, the Ottoman Empire at the time of World War I. It's this region right here, which we're talking about, so important in this region right here. Now, after that, it was chopped up into little countries by the British and the French. And one area, Palestine, Judea, the area where the Jews were at one point and had been thrown out, this became under British control. Above that, the French controlled. Iraq, the British controlled. Saudi Arabia, they kind of shared it. Here's the deal. In 1917, the British government issued a thing called the Balfour Declaration. What had happened in Europe in the intervening like 100 years earlier is the Jews are being so discriminated against in places like Russia and Ukraine and Germany and whatever, that many of them started a movement called Zionism. In other words, let's return to our ancestral homeland, Judea. where they hadn't lived in a long time, where the Jewish people had been supplanted by the Arab people who'd never left. The Balfour Declaration was a key moment in history because it basically said the establishment in Palestine, that's this area right here. That's, by the way, what the Romans would have called it, Palestine. So it's the old Roman name, a national home for the Jewish people. So they are allowing, the British are allowing Jewish people to travel here and to move here in a country that's already occupied by Palestinian Arabs who are Muslim. Now, they did say that nothing should be done which may prejudice the civil religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. In other words, let's all play fair. Everybody, the British had this naive view like we have that everybody should respect everybody else's religion and separation of church and state. That's not going to happen in the Arab world. And what happened next was this. As Zionism grew from the 1880s in Europe as a movement, about 11% of the population now of Palestine after the Balfour Declaration was Jewish. And this caused problems because people are wondering, oh my goodness, where are these people coming from? They're buying up land right and left. They're moving us out of our homeland. The Palestinians had a reaction against it. They wanted that immigration to stop. It didn't. By 1931, there were 17% of the people in Palestine were Jewish. Now, they were still the smallest group, right? But then what happens is World War II. And in World War II, you guys know how horribly it all ended with Nazi Germany, where Hitler tried to exterminate all the Jewish people in Europe in a thing called the Holocaust. 6 million of them were killed by Hitler. So after the war, the sympathy toward the Jewish plight of being persecuted wherever they go became a worldwide thing where people supported that. The United States then was the first country to recognize a new country called Israel in 1949. What happened was, and we're going back to this map right here, it was one country called Palestine at the time. Arabs and Jews lived together, but a civil war broke out. The Jewish minority won that war and established the country of Israel. And since then, more and more Jews have moved in, and the Palestinian population has been pushed back and back and lost control of a lot of their land. Here it is in 47, here it is in 67, 20 years later, and here it is as of about a decade ago. And the Palestinian people now are living in highly concentrated urban areas, and they're being encroached upon by the Jewish people coming in. This friction is creating a lot of problems in the Middle East. And I didn't list the wars, but there have been many wars fought in this area. It's just a hot spot, and it may always be, but Jerusalem is at the center of it. This city, the sacred city to Christians, Jews, and Muslims, is occupied by the Jewish state of Israel. It should probably be an international city, allowing pilgrims from all three religions to travel there freely and to worship however. But this is one of those consequences of the victory of Titus right in this same city in the year 70. So keep your eye on this and understand that sometimes things that happened 2,000 years ago are really impacting us today, and especially World War I. The way World War I ended, it really created these volatile places in the Middle East that are in our sights today. So now we have troops all throughout the Middle East. We've been fighting wars almost continuously there for 20 years. The United States has. In fact, the longest war in American history is in the country of, let's see, it's Afghanistan. It's over here. Here's Iran. Here's Iraq. We have troops there. We've been fighting almost continuously there for 20 years. So how did we get in this mess? Well, it's sometimes how World War I ended that created the dynamic that put us in the position we're at, and the way the British handled Palestine, and the way the French and British divided up the Middle East into all these little countries created problems for us today. And so here we are still living with the after effects all those years later. All right, well, let's get to, a little bit different story. So now do you kind of understand from the Roman perspective, their view of Christians at this early time? They saw them as Jews, as Jewish troublemakers. just another breakup of the Jewish people. So this meant that they were going to be persecuted too, even though they were not advocating a violent reaction against Rome. Christians weren't for that. They wanted to give unto Caesar his taxes, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but unto God what is God's, and basically peacefully go through this thing. There was no warrior group, right, at this early stage. And so we talked about all of these different things, the brotherhood, all this kind of stuff, the promise of salvation, and how Christianity was competing against other religions for adherence, for people, that means people who believe it. But Christianity was growing slowly. Now, you have to understand that Christ is synonymous with Jesus, right? His messianic mission was to bring spiritual salvation, not political or military salvation to the Jews, or now the Christians. Now, this was something that most Jews were against. So maybe that's why he was put to death. Jesus was put to death because he wasn't militant and wanted to be a warlord and strike vengeance on the Romans. He was tried by the Jewish law, but under Roman occupation, you could only be execute the death penalty was only the Romans could do it. So the Romans tried to intercede and say, are you sure you want to do this? And yeah, they proclaimed, yeah. In fact, the Romans gave them a choice between two people, free either one of these. It's kind of like, we'll give either one a pardon, Jesus or this Barabbas guy, either one, go ahead, pick. Well, I chose the other guy. So Jesus was crucified. Now, here's the deal. Martyrdom creates sympathy and understanding and interest. Why would he do this? Why would he not go along with what they were saying? Why did he have to die? Well, this allowed the missionaries of that early Christian church, the apostles and others, to share the story. And the story was compelling. This right here, I need to show you this. This is a statue done by Michelangelo the Great in the Renaissance period. And we're talking about 1400 years later, 1300 years later. It is one of the most magnificent marble sculptures ever done. If you're in the Vatican in Rome, if you go to St. Peter's Cathedral, this is right on the entryway on your right. You can't miss it. And it is absolutely glorious. It's big, it's impressive, and it's done in marble. And it was done by the great Michelangelo, of Jesus who has been killed and his mother holding him in his arms, Mary. This is a very powerful story that's now being shared by the apostles and disciples. Now, they preached that Jesus then was, after 3 days, resurrected from the dead, talking about going to an afterlife. And this confirmed his status as the Messiah or Son of God on a spiritual level, taking on the sins of the world, not trying to start a war. The apostles, Peter and Paul, were, at least Peter anyway, was very close to Jesus. There were 12 that were very close. One that came on later was Paul of Tarsus, and he was a Roman citizen who was converted, who became one of the apostles. But the apostles were the 12 closest companions, and they were sharing what's called the gospel, which is literally translated good news, the good news. Now, initially, they just taught to other Jews who would understand the background and the history of all that. But then Peter and Paul changed that. They decided that this religion should be for everybody, that it shouldn't be exclusive like Judaism was. Let's share it with everybody. And when they started to do that, they could travel quite safely and freely in the Roman Empire because of Pax Romana. This guy here, Paul of Tarsus, was a Hellenized Jew. He was Jewish, but he had a Hellenistic education, and he also had Roman citizenship. And he laid the foundation for the transformation of Christianity from a minority sect that's viewed as part of Judaism into being viewed as a separate religion, which it was, and taking it to everybody in the Roman Empire that was interested, including slaves, including plebeians, and that's where it really caught fire. Now, Nero, of course, during this time, and remember, there's revolts going on in Judea, and so this Christian group is just another group of the Jews. Remember when the fire started in Rome. We told you that story already. He was vulgar. He was a bad person. I mean, but at any rate, when the fire was happening, they say in modern times, they play on his violin. It was more like a musical harp, if you will. And he's watching all this. Did Nero set this fire to clear the slum areas of the city in order to build a new temple to himself, a new palace? Well, he did build a palace there. So you decide. But this became a political difficult situation when the people rose up and says, "Did you do this?" And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. It was these Christians. They were a convenient scapegoat in 64 CE, a convenient scapegoat, and they paid the price." Now, Peter was one of those that was killed by Nero, and not wanting to be crucified like Christ was, he elected to be crucified upside down. And then after he died, he was buried by some Christian followers here. And it was just a humble grave to begin with. But Peter is often called the rock, Petros. So if you go to the Greek word, and on this rock I will build my church is kind of one of those scriptures that's in the New Testament. And this then becomes the center of the rising now Roman Catholic Church. This big, impressive building is the biggest monument to Christianity in the world today. It's huge. If you get a chance to go, oh my goodness, do the tour, you are in for a treat. The lines, of course, stretch all the way around this portico. It's a beautiful place. It's an independent little country in Italy. Not very big, a few miles wide, a few miles long. That's it. But in the middle of it is the center of the Roman Catholic Church. It's its own government, has its own post office, it has its own little railroad stop that takes it to the rest of Rome. And you can climb up here. The coolest thing is climb all the way up. And it's kind of scary looking down because it's so far. And you get out on here and you can stand behind these figures, and they're huge. I mean, they're more than life size. And there's a little post office. And the game is you go and you buy a little postcard and you send it from the rooftop of the Vatican home. That's kind of a touristy thing to do, but it's kind of cool to do. Notice the obelisk here. I mean, everybody's borrowing something from ancient Egypt, but this is huge. And it's St. Peter's Basilica, known in Italian as Basilica di San Pietro de Vaticano. And so this then is the Vatican. Now, let's talk about the rise of this building. Since the 2nd century, this spot was thought to be the location of the tomb of St. Peter. And it only had a small shrine for a couple hundred years. Well, then, when Constantine the Great, and we'll talk about him later, we've got another lecture coming up on this. When Constantine the Great converted Rome to Christianity, he then put some money toward it, and they began to build a kind of a hall, kind of a temple kind of situation over this during those early times. So this is about 33. So we're talking almost 300 years after the death of Peter. Now, over the next 12 centuries, did you catch that? 1,200 years, the church would gradually gain importance and become a major pilgrimage site for Christians to visit. And so it kind of looked like this during medieval times. And then, of course, they made something even more grand. And the site became really important when the Pope, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, becomes more important. He becomes this religious leader to all of Western Europe. And this guy here, Charlemagne the Great, means Charles the Great, who managed to somehow unite all of these kingdoms after it had fallen apart after the fall of Rome into a thing that they called the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor truly an empire. It wasn't that big, but still it was quite an achievement. He travels to the Pope and is coronated and crowned by God's anointed leader on earth, according to their medieval thoughts, and gets crowned by the Pope. This is how important now the Catholic Church is becoming in the history of Western Europe. All right, so this church then becomes elaborately ordained with beautiful chandeliers, and they have some of the most beautiful artwork. And I should get some interiors on this. But when you walk in, you look like they have these huge paintings on the walls. They're not paintings, they're little glass mosaics. They realized that if they put real paintings up there, because in those days, everything had to be lit by candlelight, that the soot from the candlelight would damage it all, right? So instead, let's make the same paintings, but do it with little pieces of glass. And it's just absolutely stunning. It's mesmerizing how beautiful it is. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. All right. Well, listen, they began to tear down the old building, build a new one, and you know it was expensive, no doubt, but it's now the center of the Roman Catholic Church, where the Pope of Rome lives. Who, by the way, called President Biden the other day and congratulated him on his win. So that was pretty cool. When you're a Catholic, you get a call from the Pope. You've done something pretty good. All right. Well, I think we're tying the past to the present, aren't we? In both the Jewish history now and the history of the Catholic Church, and bringing it right to Joe Biden. Now let's go back to those early days before Constantine the Great and before Christianity was accepted, between the persecution of Nero and Constantine the Great. So there's a big gap there. We're talking of almost 250 years. Pliny the Younger was a Roman leader, a member of the Senate, who was also then assigned to be a judge in one of the outer colonies. He was a writer and a philosopher. His father, Pliny the Elder, was killed by Pompey. Oh, well, that's a whole nother story. But he's got a problem. In his province, they are arresting Christians because Christians refuse to offer to the Roman gods or to the Caesar himself. Remember, they deified Caesar. So you've got to go worship Caesar. To polytheists, this was no big deal. You just made a little offering to Caesar, a little offering to the Roman gods, and then go worship any way you want. But they wouldn't do it. So he's got these people that he's got arrested there, and he's got to assign punishments. And he's writing back to Emperor Trajan, what do we do with these people? They mean well, they're harmless, but yet they won't pay their taxes, so to speak. What do we do? Well, the Romans believe in the law. And so many of them then, not a ton of them, but quite a few, ended up in the gladiator contests and were put to death. This created martyrs. Even though the Romans did not want to do it, according to the law, they were left no choice. And probably the best example of this willingness to be martyred for their beliefs were two people in North Africa, Perpetua and Felicity. One was a patrician and wealthy. The other was a plebeian slave. They were, grew up together, or they lived together, and one served the other, but they both converted to Christianity. And when asked to offer to the Roman gods and to Caesar or whatever, they wouldn't do it. And they were then taken down and fed to the lions. This was the martyrdom of 203. These two then became saints in later times in the Roman Catholic Church, heroes to the cause. And the fact that one was a rich noblewoman and the other was a mere slave added to this idea that this religion accepts everybody, regardless of class. And so this is how Christianity catches fire. It starts to grow. Rather than being suppressed by the persecutions, it actually grew. And part of it was too, is their theology allowed them, for example, if their neighbor was hungry and needed food and was standing in a food line in their cars for 20 miles waiting for food, that Christians should be there to help them. Do you know the largest charitable organization in the world today is the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Charities? If you combine all the Muslim charities together, they're bigger, but the one single charity, the biggest of all, is Catholic Charities to this day. So we see that this persecution continues until the time of this guy, Constantine. Now, this is Constantine the Great, and now we've jumped ahead to 324 to 337 in that window right there. Here's what happens. Constantine has got a problem, okay? Rome is falling apart. It's been divided into 4 sections where 4 different leaders are leading each section. He's got one of the sections. His section is up near France and up into the north areas. In fact, maybe if I can go back, just take a minute to get to this map, and I'll kind of show you how it broke out. I should put a better map in there, and I will one day. But let's go back to this one. So they split it into four. He had this portion, another general had this portion, another general had this portion, and another general had this portion. Now, here's the deal. He's up in England taking care of the Scots who were rebelling, and his legion
3 minutes.
yelled out this imperator and made him emperor. So he's and his troops marched on the other troops for him to unite Rome under his one single leadership. And he did it. And how did he do it? With Christian soldiers who joined his banner and put the Christian symbols on their shields and scriptures on their spear points. And when they went to face the opposing legion, many of them were Christian too and wouldn't fight them and switch sides. And guess what? With the help of Christian soldiers, Constantine was able to take the empire over and put it under his control. He couldn't have done it without a pro-Christian army. Christians weren't the majority of people, but they were important to his taking over. And he decided, okay, I'm going to take this new religion. He saw the handwriting on the wall. This is going to be the majority religion one day. Let's just jump over and now let's convert all of Rome to Christianity today. And that's why he's called Constantine the Great. So that's a great place to stop. And we'll do a little bit of touch up, and then we'll have a study guide ready to go on Monday for you as we wrap up this whole story of Rome, the rise of Christianity, and what happened to Judaism. All right, cool. Thank you for the 3-minute warning. That was perfect.